Hello, welcome to this installment of Red Helix Cyber in Focus podcast. I'm joined today by Christian Toon, and we are going to be talking about the realities of dealing with a cyber breach. We've talked about cyber breaches and incident response a few times on the podcast, but in this episode, we're drawing on Christian's experience to talk about the business reality, the human element, and stay away from the technical playbook. Christian, it's fantastic having you here. Christian's got significant experience in the information security industry, previously CISO at Pinsent Masons, and more recently, co-director of the Birmingham BSides, which I'll get him to intro with in a minute. Also the founder of Alvarium Associates, where you provide fractional advisory services. Christian, it's great to have you join me and have your experience on the show.
Thank you, Tom.
Let's start off. Give me the elevator pitch for Birmingham BSides.
Birmingham BSides, like the franchises across the world, we host and make available to the community security-related content that wouldn't normally be available to students, community members, and focuses on pushing the boundaries on research and knowledge and sharing that with the community in a safe and enjoyable space.
It's a fantastic series of events, and I know that people get the networking but also the educational side of sharing their knowledge from BSides.
100%. Started over in Vegas once upon a time, and now you can find it pretty much in most cities here in the UK. The biggest and probably longest established is London. Then you've got Lancaster, Leeds, Bristol, Brighton, Cheltenham, and everywhere in between. They're really great community-led events that put on so much great content, but also do a lot of giving back. There's a lot of charity work that is supported through those events as well, which is great to hear.
Fantastic. We'll share some links in the notes so people can go and have a look at BSides, particularly Birmingham, see what's going on there. In this episode, we're talking specifically about the reality of dealing with a breach or a cyber incident. What's your experience around that area?
My defining career moment of a breach wasn't actually a cyber one. It was a physical breach where a group of intruders got into a highly sensitive and very unique physical environment and supported an investigation there with law enforcement, Transport for London. We had international investigators flown in. It was a real big ticket, almost Hollywood affair. As things normalized and everyone grew into cyber, the incidents and the events, as with many, started small: data theft, data loss, account compromise, and then moved more into events to then seeing big ticket ransomware, business affecting crisis unfold. I've been fortunate to be in two of those. And then more recently, with my time at Pinsent Masons, we moved from the in-house security team to a external client supporting role during time of crisis. Pinsent Masons were quite often the lawyers on insurance panels. They'd be the lawyers that got drafted in to deal with those breaches. I'd lead the team responsible for the professional services side of that response. We got to see a lot of organizations at their most vulnerable, suffering predominantly with ransomware type issues or data extortion related issues. I would be very much the fly on the wall in those crisis scenarios.
It's fascinating listening to you call out the different types of incident, the different types of stakeholders, the challenges business faces, just that phrase, when they're at their most vulnerable. That's exactly the time when you want to pull out your polished plan or your experienced supportive consultant to help coach you through that incident, because with the aim being getting back to normal as soon as possible. Hearing you talk about that makes you realize how challenging those times are. We always start off with discussing the threat landscape, and in terms of incident response, the threat landscape in the UK is telling us that businesses need to consider this as when, not if. There's a statistic from the UK government cyber breach report that came out in April that just over 600,000 organizations had reported a breach in the preceding 12 months, which just brings it home that this is really, really key topic for business leaders to get their head around and think about how they would lead their team through this. What makes this topic resonate for you? Obviously, you've got a vast amount of experience, but you've now got fractional advisory services, doing lots of work with BSides, sharing your knowledge. What makes this topic really important to you?
What makes it important for me is how it's evolved. Once upon a time, everyone just thought that big breach, big incident was where it was at. As we've seen, and many people watching and listening to this will understand that within cyber, there's different levels of incident. You've got the big business affecting, possibly wipe out doomsday scenario. Then you've got something perhaps a little bit more benign. What we've seen is the scale of those responses and how they've adjusted over time to become more of a business as usual response and activities. Business email compromise is a great one. Phishing, somebody's leaked their credentials. And it tends to be more of a muscle memory response now for technology and security teams. Either attempts have been made and blocked, or attempts have been successful, and actually it's the speed at which they can shut those down. Third-party compromises is another one, again, where vendors are supporting your business, but not necessarily in a critical domain. They're not providing applications or services, but may at one point have some information, and it becomes more of a compliance follow-up that you want to make sure that you understand what's been breached, what's been taken, what's been affected, and actually looking then at your own obligations. Then you've got very much the sharp end of the market where ransomware takes hold and destabilizes your business, or data has been stolen a significant amount and sensitivities, etc. Actually, all of a sudden, you are then at your most vulnerable because you'd discounted it to date and now finding yourself with a quite a significant business challenge there. What are you going to do? And how are you going to do that? The realities of that significant breach, because it's a black sheep event for a lot of organizations that they've probably written down and theorized how they would respond, but they've never truly tested it. They're living their playbook minute by minute. Quite often, because they haven't spent the time rehearsing it and becoming more familiar with it, it goes out the window and they got to be advised or guided through said incidents either by their lawyers, by their insurers, or external advisors.
Most people listening to this will be from the SMB sector in the UK, small, medium-sized businesses, and there's still that thinking which is ingrained in a lot of people's mindset that this is an enterprise play, Jaguar Land Rover, M&S, won't happen to us. You've got levels of resilience that push small breaches away, such as phishing attempts where it would have been caught by your endpoint protection, or someone in a SOC would have caught it in a seam and had some low-level response, right up to how are we building resilience against ransomware. The fact that actually ransomware remains the number one threat to UK businesses. Unfortunately, it is rife. Going back to right at the beginning, this is when, not if, and being prepared is the best thing that you can do alongside building resilience to make sure you survive.
Yeah, 100%. The two headaches and possible risks that small to medium-sized businesses really need to look at. First and foremost is ransomware. It's losing your digital business. All of a sudden, you can't email, you don't have access to your customer records or your machine statistics or controlling of any stuff in your business. All of a sudden, that goes offline. What do you do? The second area tied more to business email compromise, because I see the SMBs that we work with are targeted more than I've seen in some enterprises, because they're perhaps seen as not having the right controls or not having the maturity to deal with this, so seen as easy prey. But quite simply, that's just confidence fraud, or it's financial fraud. They want to submit fake invoices into the system and get those paid out, which, again, wanting to protect your cash flow, and you may not have insurance that covers this stuff. It can really be business affecting. And at that level, there's the great story, great in terms of evidence. I mean, it's absolutely horrendous that a business, it was Knights, they're regional movers,
Knights of
old that got wiped out. They couldn't continue trading. Thankfully, people still had their health and were able to walk away from it, but the business itself could not come back from that. That's what business owners, boards, management need to ask themselves, is if they're faced with that level of disruptive events, how are they going to recover? What does a recovery plan look like? How do they evidence resilience in what they do? Systems are offline, can't get into my Microsoft Outlook. What do we do? More recently, one of the big high street retailers that suffered a breach had the similar question, and they ended up spinning up a separate Google environment to work in. It was a quick and available access to email, to Word, to communication kind of capability. What are you going to do? We don't get as comfortable as we should being uncomfortable these days. Everyone just assumes things will work because we have a great 99.9% uptime on a lot of our services. But the reality is if they get disrupted, then that changes very quickly.
Something that I've noticed over the last few months is we're having a lot more discussions around immutable backups. It's not necessarily something that's our speciality, given that we're a managed security service provider, but it's something that when we deal with clients, we'll always try and impress on them the best practices, and immutable backups in a security stack is going to be really important. The amount of discussions that we've had where people have gone, no, they don't have a suitable solution given the threats that we spoke about earlier on, and they weren't planning on doing anything about that. You start to then explain how that works in the ecosystem of all the other investment that they're making and how they would recover, having a point in time that's known to be safe to recover back to. Otherwise, if you don't have that, the chances that you end up being hung out to dry like knights of old, where you cannot physically recover because the data is just not there to recover to, is a real challenge. We strayed slightly into planning cyber resilience. We've covered the threat landscape, and we've got to the point that this is an important subject now. A lot of what we're probably going to discuss doesn't actually have to cost businesses anything. That's a really interesting element, because a lot of the time we speak to information security managers and CISOs, and especially when they're speaking to someone like me from Red Helix, they immediately think that this is going to cost the world. But actually, a lot of what we'll discuss now is just about being mentally prepared, an element of exercising, which is time, which I suppose does cost businesses money. But realistically, people can put this together and they can do something for very little.
Finding that time's always a challenge, because they hold the view that, look, we're capable people, we can run a business, we deal with every other challenge that's faced with us on a day-to-day basis, we'll deal with that if and when it gets to it. They don't give it that time, because I do see that mindset existing.
Recognizing the return on your investment as to where you're putting your time is quite important. The answer from when we were discussing about when, not if scenario with this, the chance of ransomware, the proliferation of business email compromise, actually this can be a really good place to spend your time. Diving into this for a security practitioner in the business, looking around the C-suite, the board, and the leaders within the business, who are the key personalities that they need to be building relationships with to get them on board for when they may need to call on them during an incident?
First, if the business is lucky enough to have a security lead, however they are framed, whether it is a CISO, a head of, a manager, the technology lead normally is the most senior one that falls into that. Where do you go for good advice? The market, unfortunately, is very proliferated with mixed quality of advice. When we've spoken before, you've seen it's amazing what other businesses get away with, but you need some external support, whether that's expertise technically from a security point of view, legally, etc. And then quite often the hurdle of seems expensive. If you're thinking about preventative expertise being expensive, wait until you really need them and you don't have those relationships put into play. Quite often I use the hotel analogy. Tom, you obviously travel. When you go away on holiday or when you travel for work, how often do you book your hotel in advance? You get a good rate. Of course you do.
Yeah.
If you turn up at that hotel on the day or the night you want to stay in it, all of a sudden, all of those savings and deals just disappear and you get the hotel rack rate and it's 500-600 quid, way more than what you were originally paying. Same thing applies with expertise across the industry. Getting the understanding of who you need in the room is vital, and getting those arrangements put into place with retainers or MOUs before you need them is one of the best things to do. Lawyers are often overlooked, and spending 3 or 4 years working with the breach lawyers at Pinson's really showed me an insight into breach response that I'd never seen before as CISO from my time at Coventry Building Society, Pinson's themselves, and other organizations. It was a gap in my knowledge. When it comes to those big ticket breaches, the legal teams, the general counsel within the business with his or her external counsel are the ones that kind of lead the incident. So again, more likely they'll have a legal team or a legal person, a general counsel within that business than they would necessarily a security person. But everything then gets wrapped up when a ransomware incident occurs through a legal lens, because you've got legal obligations, you've got regulatory reporting, market reporting obligations, confidentiality. You might have legal processes that need to be enacted on if somebody's stolen data as part of this ransomware. You might want to take out an injunction against persons unknown to stop them publishing that, or if they do publish it, you have a strong legal mechanism to have it taken down a lot quicker than you would do normally. Bringing those people together. Quite often the external lawyers or breach counsel, as they're referred, as the name suggests, counsel the organization then through that scenario. They may then mobilize incident response as part of that. crisis communications, as well as working with leads from HR, marketing, the CFO, CEO, etc., from within the business. Quite often, they're the linchpin of a good, solid instant response.
There's a whole wealth of stakeholders there that if you are the security lead in a business, you're probably thinking, actually, at the moment, I don't have much of a relationship with our GC. And the GC might even be fractional, because if it's a small business, it might be someone that only provides advice on an ad hoc basis. External lawyers. From a security leader's perspective, what can they do to buy people into their plan and their requirement to have a cohesive understanding of what happens in the event an incident occurs?
Sure, they've got to be open to ask questions. They've got to go find who the right people are. If it is a fractional GC, if it's a fractional CFO or a HR lead or the CEO or managing director, whoever's in that leadership space, if they don't exist or they're still struggling to find out who that looks for, I'd perhaps then refer myself to the board, maybe some of the non-execs who have a view on who it should be. It might be the roles haven't been assigned previously because they knew they've never had to do this. There might be a bit of a process to work through to say, well, is it me? Is it you? Is it this person, that person? Once we've assigned who those key roles are and define them, being clear on what that looks like. As we've seen in countless incidents before, that first response is the confusion. People don't really know who's meant to be doing what. And if they've gone as far as having a playbook, it's probably on a shelf somewhere that the auditor's signed off on it, but it's not really ingrained itself into the business. Then people are a bit unclear as to not only the roles and responsibilities that people have, but quite clearly the decisions that then need to be taken, or the process and the actions. The breach has happened and it's a big affecting company-wide thing. Does the security lead have the right level of authority to make decisions affecting the business? It could be spend in terms of the response. Can the security lead spend up to £500,000 on incident response? Can the security leads speak to the market, speak to journalists, speak to the insurers? Quite often, some of the business processes that they might say that, well, employees can't speak to the media unless it's been sanctioned by the MD. Okay, fine. So what's the response for a cyber scenario in there? Or the insurance, or mobilizing the services that may come from an insurance policy, are normally only restricted to approved named individuals that bought the policy 6 months ago. Is that security lead the same person? That decision-making piece is often the blind spot that individuals and roles assume that things will just happen. As you go through that scenario, who's deciding if you're negotiating with the criminal group in the first instance? Is that negotiation genuine because you need to get access back to your systems, or are you using that as a known delay tactic to buy you some more time to deal with that incident? Or if you're recovering, who makes the call on that last backup? How do you know that that last backup hasn't been tainted or compromised? Who does that sit with? Does that sit with your outsourced IT provider? Is that the security lead? Is that something more that legal need to go through? And again, working through these decisions and spending some time in peacetime to say, well, okay, Tom, I feel comfortable that you can spend £500,000 in keeping of breach response. If you need to spend anything more than that, come and speak to me as the CFO of that business. Okay, fine, we know that. Document that, we understand it, and that's where we sit. But so many businesses, because they think that it's not going to happen to them, or we'll just deal with it, we'll be fine, don't sit down and go through those important questions, those decision points about what needs to happen during that incident.
I was running a roundtable recently, and we had one delegate who was the information security manager at a medium-sized business delivering some technology widget into the UK market. And we were discussing cyber resilience, and we got onto this topic around building resilience through rehearsing your instant response. He had a really good model that he'd implemented where he had a monthly session. Every month, muscle memory, he would get a portion of, he called it his war cabinet, which I thought was reasonably apt, right? Because we start getting into military analogies when we talk instant response, especially given, as you mentioned, the confusion and the nature of the decisions that you have to start being able to make. And it's all very militaristic in the terminology that then starts creeping into what we're trying to achieve. He was doing that every month, and I thought, that's fantastic. You've literally got the best practice guide and you're trying to implement best practice. Any more than that, he would struggle to get buy-in because it would be seen that he's taking up too many people's time. But Every month, everybody knew on a certain day for an hour, they would sit in a room and go through some discussion that would lead to an outcome to go into the cyber response plan. And I thought that was really good. When you've built those stakeholders, what have you seen that really works in terms of getting people together, running these discussions and getting those people to understand, right, I do know my role. I do know that when we go to switch that system off, we've got to understand the implications of it. And I've got to come with my latest manufacturing report or whatever it is. How do you do that in practice?
The security leads, the manager you've given there in that example, we all know what we need to do to make this a reality. But quite often, one of our biggest challenges in organizations is a mixture of culture and lack of senior support. If the business isn't tuned into this risk and the actions that are required, if you don't have that advocate, that senior sponsor, it's going to be very, very difficult to change an organization or to present an hour a month of people's time without somebody quarterbacking you to say, you've asked, the others now need to listen. It can be really soul destroying when you do not have that. If you don't have that, what I found does work well is to change the narrative or change the line of questioning, because often security folk just talk about security and the confidentiality and integrity and availability matters regarding their priorities. That's all great. It's all really important, but because it's not spoken in the language of business, they don't get it. So look at how those requests are going through. Instead of talking about impacts to confidentiality and availability of the information we're trying to protect, talk about downtime of the business or impact costs of the business, expenses that the business is going to affect, reputational measures that may be impacted. Any business leader worth their salt will be very much tuned into their budgets, how much they're spending, their revenue, profit, reputation, etc., and want to make sure that through the course of business that is protected. So if they're not listening first time, change your language and adjust that. If they're still not listening, I would then, again, tied to culture, but I would start to pick up a few one-to-one conversations with folk more senior. Big fan of approaching the board and the non-exec community. They can have those conversations on your behalf. I have never found a non-exec that isn't interested about cyber and have been able to support me in a number of conversations and keep me out of it. So this isn't a Christians telling tales outside of school and I go and get dogged in because the CEO is not listening to me. They do it in a way that it kind of keeps me out of the picture, which is great. If that hasn't had the desired effect, and 99 times out of 100 it probably will, you're then left with the third option, which is the realization that that business is not taking security seriously. You've got a choice. You either personally put up with it and realize that this is the way the business is going. You've tried those attempts to get them through. You need to make sure you've got a very good risk register because you need to cover your ass at this point. The other option to that is, well, look, you go find an organization that you feel you can add value to and do take it seriously. Security is not the only seat at the table. There are many things that make a business operate and work. Quite often, they are more of a priority to the business leaders than security ever will be.
Which is ironic because security and the risk of security can make the business stop operating very quickly.
Yeah, when it goes wrong, it has that potential. I was chatting with someone this morning about the analogy of car servicing and incidents. Good preventative maintenance on your car, your motor vehicle, is you get it serviced, you do this and make sure it's roadworthy, etc. The same thing could be applied for your breach response or cyber plans. Test them, check them, make sure they're fit for standard, etc., etc. But actually, you might not be able to afford it that month because something else has just hit. That annual service you were going to do or the monthly check-in, you're going to leave that till next month because you're focusing on some other things. Your car still operates. Your insurance is still valid. You haven't had an accident, it's not let you down, and you're probably okay. That's a lot of how businesses tend to think with this, is that because then they've delayed it and put it off and it hasn't happened, they'll probably see how far they can get it. Unlike a car where you get your engine management light pop up, you don't necessarily get that with cyber because you don't get that early warning system.
You mentioned about the risk register being an absolute critical part for covering your ass. It all comes back to how security professionals are articulating the risk back to the business. When we're talking about the most recent discussion about how we're securing AI, about how there's a requirement for budgets for the cloud security, all of that is about going back to the business, utilizing your champions that you've got amongst the senior leadership and explaining the risk and the benefits of the spend. In all areas, the industry holistically is really poor at communicating back to the business continues to be something that we need to work on. That's exactly where fractional advisory services that Alvarium associates provide comes into fruition. You've got someone to come and support you getting through a particular challenge or providing a different opinion on how you can communicate things back to business to be successful. So we've talked about the organizational response and how there's this broad range of stakeholders that we want to get on board. We want to provide them with some education. We want to win over some senior stakeholders. We've done that. We've probably done some instant response exercising where hopefully we've got buy-in to talk through our decision support table, which would be what decisions need to be made, who needs to make them, what's the outcome of each decision, things like that. And again, that's quite a military phrase you would use within a military headquarters to understand how decisions were going to be made, mainly so that if a key person wasn't there, then they knew who was going to be the number two, who's deputizing for that person on that decision, so that you can still maintain momentum with what you're trying to achieve, even if someone wasn't available. Which you do hear about. The CEO wasn't picking his phone up because it was the middle of the night and we really needed to turn the cloud database off, but we couldn't because he wasn't there.
Which comes to that decision authority. If that's the only person that can make that decision, is there a secondary level approval that says you as the security lead or the technology lead or the business lead, are you empowered in light of not being able to get hold of anyone to make a business decision, but you know it's the right thing to do? Are you the party to take that decision and turn that access off because it will stop and deal with the risk at hand? Or are you then going to get lambasted after the fact because you took the decision to switch it off? That's the great example of where you need to get those decisions out in the open beforehand. So in that scenario, what do we do? It might be that other alternatives are provided or authorities granted out of hours or in these certain scenarios that you wouldn't normally get during the day-to-day job, but actually at 3 a.m, big crisis, critical level response, yes, you're suddenly empowered to do the right thing.
It's very tricky, and I can imagine that takes a significant toll on the team that are dealing with it, especially when it's at a difficult time, making difficult decisions. We talk about this team, but to bring it to life for the audience, let's unpack the first few hours of an incident. What actually happens when you realize that this is real and something bad is going on?
You tend to see a lot of confusion and panic across the organization of the, oh my God, this has the potential to be huge. I wish we'd done the 24 things we've been trying to do all year that would have mitigated this. People in the business completely outside of the technology and security functions are coming into equipment that doesn't work. And not just the, I can log in, but the internet's a bit slow. Nothing's working. The traditional lines of communication, Teams messages, intranet pages, email updates that would normally be used to speak to the employee base aren't available. Therefore, you've got a lot of people that don't really know what's going on. Stuff's not working, but they've had cases where stuff doesn't work and actually they don't know if that's a 5-minute, 5-day, 5-week outage. All of a sudden, it becomes quite challenging to get messages out to the general population. But then that's one part of that response, the communications part. The technology and security teams are actually trying to work out what has happened. Some of the times they maybe don't have the forensic training themselves or don't know what they need to be looking for, how to investigate that. So they then need to go and bring in some people that do. If they're lucky enough, they have a plan or they have some third party on point to do that. And they'll mobilize that service in the hope that they haven't trashed the crime scene themselves in trying to work things out as to what does good look like. But it's very much trying to get a situational awareness of what is actually the current state of that business. What has happened? What's affected? What does that mean?
And it must be significantly stressful time. You've had personal experience of these things and also worked alongside people dealing with incidents. We spoke a bit about the mental health implications and the toll on the people that are dealing with this inside the organization. It's fascinating and probably worthy of its own podcast. What's your view on that? Because I don't think it's as widely reported and discussed in the industry as it probably should be, given that this is a significant challenge for people.
Definitely. Stress is very different depending on where you are in the business. If you're the CEO, managing director, all of a sudden your business has stopped. No more revenue, no more widgets, no more products. And suddenly a massive workforce that are just sat idle because they don't know what to do. You've then got the pressures of the board and investors wanting to know what's gone on and what's happened. There's very much an urge to report the full details as if we know them so people can make decisions on them. But the reality is that it isn't a quick process necessarily to ascertain what has gone on. You can't make the decisions you want to be making. The added pressure is, well, I want to know what's gone on. That continued pressure to report and to validate what has happened is very tough. The technology and the security teams are then front and center of working out what actually has got on. How do we fix this? What do we need to do to confirm what was happened? Not just somebody got in, did a bad thing, we kicked them out and we're starting to rebuild, because actually you don't know what they got in to do. When they were here, were they tampering with the backups? You think restoring straight from backup is a good thing because that's what backups are for. And by restoring from backup, you reintroduce them back into your environment. Or you might not have access to your backups because that was one of the things they came into. We've seen cases where internal teams have just tried to do the right thing and they've trampled all over the crime scene. When the actual forensic investigators have got in, they're unable to ascertain what was done by whom because devices had been reset, servers had been decommissioned and taken offline and affected the forensic integrity of the network. The only thing left then was to just rebuild from scratch, a complete new environment. 80-90% of your technology and security teams in-house will be committed to the cause of recovery. They will want to see the business back up and running in as soon as possible time, and it will put in the time to do so. Which is where you then have to look at that burnout becomes very real in crisis scenarios because people run more on adrenaline than they do on experience and training. That's a real big thing to watch out for. Having those designated breaks or mandating shifts and rotas for response becomes absolutely crucial. People won't want to step away from the keyboard and go for a walk, step away from the keyboard and go get something to eat, because they're bought into that mission for response. In a way, they almost feel this is what we've trained for. Actually, your role in the leadership of crisis is to look after those people. It's that crisis, the scenario, the incident doesn't matter. The people do. Take care of the people and they'll take care of that incident. So often overlooked.
There's an element of taking care. You mentioned about peacetime earlier, which I love that analogy of there being peacetime and crisis. That's all going to be based on relationships that you've built and solidified during peacetime that then pay dividends when there's a crisis. A lot of leaders miss the point around looking after your team when everything is going smoothly. They then aren't able to reap the benefits because that team won't jump for them when the crisis hits. It's a really, really important point. Crisis leadership is a fantastic topic. I'm thinking of other podcasts here as well. We've gone through incidents and the team and right up to the toll on the team members' mental health. It's key to go through some actionable insights. Have someone who's been through and had experience of incidents. For the people that are listening, what should they take away from this as something to put on their to-do list to enhance their ability to respond?
Sure. There's probably three things I'd focus on if you don't know where to start or think you've been doing it for a while and how do we improve it. My first one has got to be backup. We've talked about it through this session. Immutable, ransomware resilient, off network, a backup capability for your business that covers your data, your systems, your services, that if you need to, you can take without fear of compromise or integrity questions into a completely new environment and spin it back up. That's what good backup and recovery capability really does look like. Quite often it's on the same network or it's done once a month and it's not as frequent as it should be. It's just focusing on data. And that's another common one we see. Yeah, we've got backups, all our data's here, but organizations haven't looked at the systems or the services needed to access that data. Quite simply, you can hold the data and recover it into an environment, but you can't log in to access it. That's going to be a big faux pas. Don't just look at data, look at the services and the supporting capabilities that are needed. Once you've dealt with backup, that incident response is going to be key, and that team is key. Refamiliarize yourself with who that team are. If you're the technology lead or the security lead, I would go and make friends with the legal team, the general counsel, the lawyer, whoever you've got on the in-house side. It's absolutely vital as part of a proper incident response that is then legally led. They can offer legal privilege, protections around items to be disclosed as part of that. That can really help with incident management. It's not a silver bullet, so it can be challenged, but it's a good starter for 10. Regulatory notifications can be tough, and interactions with the regulator can be quite difficult. So offloading that to the legal team can be a real win for the security and technology folk. The third component then is around that mental health and your team. Quite often, incident response plans and playbooks have these processes in from start to finish with no consideration that there are people in the loop and that those people need some element of care, attention, support as part of that process. So for me, they'd be my 3 takeaways.
Fantastic. That wraps up our discussion really nicely. I always end on an extra question for you, though. There's so many challenging things that we've talked through, and there's probably people looking at their notes from listening to us discuss that and thinking, how do I link things together? And what we don't want to do is leave them with something that they might underestimate. What's the one thing that you see that commonly gets underestimated around incident response, and what can someone do about that?
Great question. The thing that gets underestimated is the coordination of third parties. There are some great expertise available, and people have built their plans to include MSSPs and incident responders and everyone else. Managing them is quite a full-time task in itself. Coordinating logistics of calls, of maybe physical presence if needed, availability, calendars, diaries, etc., is just an assumed admin element of an incident. But actually, to do it well and to do it properly can take up a significant amount of time. If you've got to capture and make sure you've got a clear record of activity and decisions through that incident, coordinating that level of detail from third parties is quite often one that's overlooked. Again, prepping in peacetime to make sure that those suppliers are clear on their delivery obligations and you're aware of their availability and their support, etc. Getting that play, not just saying, okay, yeah, we've signed a contract and we've got some retained time with said supplier and we'll give them a shout if we need them. It's more a partnership approach that needs to be had.
Yeah, interesting.
That's probably my item for overlooking that I tend to see the most.
That's fascinating. You almost need someone who's going to be assigned as the chief of staff for the incident, and you go, right, drop what you're previously doing and you are the chief of staff for this incident. Here's your key stakeholders that you work to, and you are booking meetings, recording minutes, recording decisions, sharing information. It's a huge administrative coordination task, but really interesting. If you were the security leader, you just would not have the bandwidth to do all of that at the same time as doing your other job. That's a really fantastic one to finish up with. Christian, it's been fantastic having you on. We'll make sure we share details around how to get in touch with you. Both of us are on LinkedIn, so anyone listening can find us there and connect with us. We'll also share information about Avarium Associates and BSides to make sure people can find the information around those 2 organizations. There's loads more episodes of this podcast. If you found us on YouTube, we're also on Spotify and vice versa. Some of the recent ones are to do with the changes to Cyber Essentials, which is really important for anyone going for their renewal because there's been some significant changes. Also around AI security, a super hot topic. Christian, thank you very much for joining me. It's been fantastic to draw on your experience, and we've got some other podcasts coming up in the next few months, which will also be fantastic. Definitely one around mental health and information security, because that's a fantastic topic to discuss.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.